If you've been following the rise of OpenAI and wondered what was really happening behind the headlines, or if you want to see how a handful of Silicon Valley power players reshaped global technology, labor, culture, and politics, or if you're curious or anxious about the economic and ethical consequences of generative AI, if so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing Empire of AI, Dreams and Nightmares in Sam Altman's OpenAI by Karen Hao. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Drake, and on this channel, I read widely across genres: history, biography, fantasy, political, nonfiction, literary fiction, anything else that catches my eye, and I give you structured, thoughtful reviews that help you decide what to read next. I first heard about Empire of AI on the Economist podcast. They have been paying very close attention to artificial intelligence, the rise of OpenAI, and the rapid transformations happening across the tech world. When they mentioned Karen Hao's upcoming book, they highlighted it as one to watch for. That turned out to be correct. When it finally appeared on Libby, the waitlist was extremely long, which tells you just how much interest there is in this topic right now, as well as pretty much any other book regarding generative AI. Empire of AI takes readers inside the creation and evolution of OpenAI, following the founders, researchers, executives, and critics who shaped one of the most influential organizations of the 21st century. Karen Hao writes from years of experience covering AI at MIT Technology Review, where she developed a reputation for clear, rigorous reporting on the science and politics of machine learning. Her book is not just about technology, it is about power, who holds it, how they wield it, and what it means to all of us. With that being said, let's have a quick bio of Karen Hao herself. Karen Hao is one of the most respected technology journalists working today, known especially for her deep, rigorous reporting on artificial intelligence and the social, political, and ethical structures surrounding it. She began her career in engineering, earning a degree in mechanical engineering from MIT, where she also developed an early interest in the intersections between technology, culture, and global systems. That technical background has shaped her voice as a reporter. She writes about AI not as a distant observer, but as someone fluent in the underlying science. Hao became widely recognized during her years as a senior reporter at MIT Technology Review, where she covered everything from algorithmic bias and labor exploitation in data labeling to the internal dynamics of major AI companies like Google and Meta, DeepMind, and of course, OpenAI. Her investigative work, especially her reporting on AI ethics teams and AI safety research and the political tensions inside Silicon Valley, have earned significant acclaim. Her long-form investigations often go viral and influence public conversations about transparency and regulation and the responsibilities of AI institutions. She later joined the Wall Street Journal as a global tech reporter and then served as a senior editor at the Financial Times, expanding her focus internationally by tracking how AI development shapes geopolitical power across her career. Hao has been known for cultivating deep networks within the AI research community, interviewing engineers, CEOs, policymakers, whistleblowers, ethicists, and critics. This broad access gives her reporting a richness and authority that is rare in technology journalism. This book, Empire of AI, is her first book-length treatment of all those themes, and it draws together years of investigative work into a single narrative. She approaches OpenAI not as a mythologized stand-up, nor as an inevitable outcome of technological progress, but as a contested institution shaped by human choices and structural incentives and competing visions of the future. Hao's combination of technical fluency, ethical concerns, international perspective, and narrative clarity position her as one of the most important voices covering artificial intelligence to this day. With that being said, let's take a look at each of the sections of this book, starting with the prologue. It is a run for the throne, or at least that is the title that they give it. And the prologue of OpenAI opens with one of the most shocking moments in recent tech history, the abrupt firing of Sam Altman on November 17th, 2023, which I suspect many of us remember well. The author recounts the scene with precision. Altman, in a Las Vegas hotel room during the city's first Formula One race, logged into what he assumed would be a routine Google Meet. Instead, he found 4 of OpenAI's 5 board members waiting. Ilya Sutskever, I always have to say this, but I feel like this is especially one of those books where I do have to apologize if I do not get the name right. I'm really sorry. Some of them I recognize, some of them I don't. I'm not embedded enough into this ecosystem to know if I'm getting all the names right, and I apologize for that. So, with that being said, Ilya Sutskever delivered the news. Altman was being removed as CEO, and the announcement would go public within minutes. Altman looked away, steadied himself, and asked his familiar question, How can I help? Greg Brockman, OpenAI's president and Altman's closest allies, was also pushed out of his board role moments later. By early afternoon, the public statement was live. It accused Altman of failing to be consistently candid and declared that the board no longer trusted his leadership. The author frames this not as a simple leadership dispute, but as the first visible rupture in a deeper philosophical divide within OpenAI. The firing exposed competing visions for AI's future, conflicting beliefs about risk and safety, and the unresolved tension between missionary idealism and Silicon Valley ambition. She also signals the scope of the book ahead. Drawing on years of reporting, extensive interviews, and internal accounts, Hao presents this moment as the spark for a broader story about power, who yields it in the world of AI, and how they gained it, as well as what their decisions mean for everyone else. The Prologue's crisis is only the opening move in a much larger struggle for control over the direction and destiny of modern artificial intelligence. Which brings us to section 1, which covers chapters 1 through 5. It is titled Origins of an AI Powerhouse. Section 1 of Empire of AI traces how OpenAI emerged from a set of ideas that were as philosophical as they were technical. The author shows that before the world cared about ChatGPT or AGI timelines, the organization's founders were already constructing a worldview, one that blended moral ambition, technological optimism, and a notable amount of self-authorization. And so the opening chapter, Divine Right, establishes the intellectual atmosphere in which OpenAI was born. The author describes how several of the early leaders believed they had a unique responsibility, even an obligation, to guide the future of artificial intelligence. This belief, rooted in long-termist thinking and a fear of an unaligned superintelligence, gave the founding team a sense of mission that resembled a modern secular priesthood of types. The goal was not simply to build advanced systems, but to protect humanity from the worst possible outcomes. And so this naturally led to the ethos, which is explored in the second chapter, A Civilizing Mission, where the author recounts how OpenAI presented itself as a different kind of tech organization, one dedicated to ensuring that the benefits of artificial intelligence would serve all of humanity. Publicly, this rhetoric sounded a bit altruistic. Internally, it helped to justify the extraordinary ambitions of the team. Yet already, tension was building. To pursue this mission, the organization needed massive compute resources, specialized talent, and a scale of operations that contradicted the image of a detached philanthropic research group. And so the author frames this as the moment when idealistic mission began to collide with strategic necessity. So then in the subsequent chapter, Nerve Center, she dives into the company's internal culture, describing the research environment where these ideas took root. The early OpenAI was a hub of intense ambition, researchers pushing the boundaries of machine learning, ethicists trying to understand the consequences, founders navigating the balance between fear and evangelism. Hao highlights the contradictions embedded in the organization's core, a desire for openness paired with a sense that openness could be dangerous, a nonprofit structure paired with competitive pressures, or a vision of global uplift paired with the reality that power was consolidating in the hands of a tiny group. The next chapter, Dreams of Modernity, widens the frame, connecting OpenAI's aspirations to a long tradition of technological utopianism. The author traces how leaders at OpenAI saw artificial intelligence as the engine of a new global order, something capable of reshaping economies, governance, and the lived experience of modern life. These dreams energized the organization, but also encouraged a belief that their work was not just innovative, but historically inevitable. In this chapter, the author is clear that OpenAI's leaders were not simply building tools, they believed they were building the next stage of human civilization. Audacious much? Finally, in the last chapter in this opening section, Scale of Ambition, she examines the point at which OpenAI's goals outgrew its nonprofit origins. The author details the growing dependence on corporate partnerships, especially with Microsoft, and the internal debates about how to balance safety as well as mission and the demands of rapid technological progress. By the end of this section, it is clear that the organization that began with lofty quasi-spiritual commitments had transformed into something far more complex, a hybrid institution navigating both the philosophical stakes of AGI and the real-world pressures of the global tech economy. Together, these chapters provide the foundation for the drama and conflicts that unfold later in the book. So before OpenAI became a household name, the author shows it was already an institution shaped by tension between mission and ambition, as well as fear and innovation, as well as altruism and power. Which brings us to section number 2, which covers chapters 6 through 9, called OpenAI Transformed. And this traces the period when OpenAI moved from an ambitious research collective into a world-defining institution, a transformation marked by rapid growth, internal strain, and a shift from philosophical mission to commercial power. The section begins with Ascension, which follows the surge of momentum after OpenAI's early breakthroughs in large-scale neural networks. The author shows how models like GPT-2 and GPT-3 reshaped the company's internal identity, and what had once been theoretical, the pursuit of an artificial general intelligence, suddenly felt within reach. And so, Sam Altman, in particular, rises as the gravitational center of this ascendant moment, becoming a public evangelist for both the potential and the inevitability of OpenAI's technology. The author frames this ascension as a turning point. The company was no longer defining the future of AI, but it was beginning to own it. This new influence, however, had consequences. So in the next chapter, Science in Captivity, the author examines how the research culture inside OpenAI began to shift under the pressures of confidentiality, commercialization, and safety concerns. Initially founded on ideals of openness, the organization now found itself restricting access, controlling publication, and restructuring teams around secrecy. So researchers who once felt part of a free-flowing scientific community increasingly found themselves inside a guarded institution. The author is careful not to romanticize early years, but to make clear that changing dynamic, especially the fear that sharing too much might empower rivals or accelerate risk, created a new and sometimes disorienting reality for scientists inside the company. And the shift becomes even more pronounced in Dawn of Commerce, where the author traces the emergence of OpenAI's hybrid corporate model, especially its defining partnership with Microsoft. As compute demands skyrocketed, the company required an infrastructure only a major tech giant could supply. The so-called capped profit structure allowed OpenAI to raise unprecedented resources while still claiming more distance from ordinary capitalism. And so the author argues that this moment marks the company's true commercial birth. Paid API access, enterprise partnerships, and negotiations with global firms signaled that OpenAI was no longer merely a research lab, it had become an industry. And with industry came influence as well as political, economic, and cultural desires. Finally, in the last chapter in the section, Disaster Capitalism, she explores how OpenAI and its leadership positioned themselves amid growing public anxiety about AI's power. The author uses the term to suggest a tension. The company warned urgently about the dangers of runaway AI, while simultaneously accelerating deployment and leveraging those fears to justify their leadership role. As public concern about misinformation and automation and existential risk intensified, OpenAI became both the architect of the crisis and the self-proposed solution. So the author is quite measured here, but the critique is also quite unmistakable. The very conditions that raised OpenAI's profile also solidifies its control over the narrative surrounding AI safety and ethics and governance. So together, these chapters depict an institution moving rapidly beyond its founding ideals. The OpenAI of Section 2 is no longer the philosophical nonprofit of its early days. It is an ascendant global actor, commercially empowered, scientifically guarded, and increasingly aware of its sweeping influence over the future of intelligence itself. Which brings us to section number 3, which covers chapters 10 through 14, Power, Myth, and the Politics of Intelligence. This section examines the period when OpenAI reached cultural and political prominence, and the author says this was also the moment when the company became deeply invested in its own mythology. The line between scientific achievement, public narrative, and institutional self-justification grew increasingly blurry. So, this section opens with the chapter Gods and Demons, where the author explains that OpenAI's worldview began to crystallize around two intertwined visions, one casting advanced AI systems as humanity's greatest opportunity, and the other presenting them as its greatest threat. According to the author, these competing narratives strengthened each other. The more OpenAI warned of catastrophic outcomes, the more central the company appeared in managing those risks. The more it celebrated near-divine breakthroughs in intelligence, the more it fueled the belief that the safest path forward was simply to let OpenAI lead. In the next chapter, Apex, the author describes how OpenAI's public stature reached its peak. Major model releases positioned the company as the defining institution of the AI age. Sam Altman's global profile rose accordingly as he visited governments and advised policymakers and engaged with the media. This Apex moment, the author says, also intensified internal tensions. Questions about governance, transparency, and the distribution of authority became increasingly urgent as employees recognized that OpenAI no longer operated as a small, idealistic research group, but as a central pillar of global technological power. Then in the chapter Plundered Earth, this shifts the perspective outward. The author says it is essential to understand the hidden infrastructure that makes modern AI possible. Large language models are trained on enormous data sets that require vast amounts of electricity and water and depend on human labor, particularly content labelers in the global south, whose work remain largely invisible. The author argues that OpenAI's accomplishments sit atop networks of extraction and that the environmental and human costs of these systems must be acknowledged if the world hopes to understand the true consequences of AI development. In the next chapter, The Two Prophets. This was a fascinating chapter. They were all fascinating, but I found this one particularly interesting. The author examines the growing philosophical divide between Sam Altman and Ilya Sutskever. Again, apologize, wish I knew how to say your name. Both men believed deeply in AGI's transformative potential, but the author says their temperaments diverged sharply. Altman emphasized acceleration, deployment, and competitive positioning. Sutskever increasingly focused on safety, consciousness, and metaphysical concerns about the nature of intelligence. According to the author, this divergence set the stage for an internal fracture that would later become unavoidable. This section concludes with Deliverance, where the author describes a rising sense of urgency within OpenAI. Many employees felt that the organization's founding mission was slipping out of reach, even as leadership adopted the belief that only by pushing faster could the company prevent worse outcomes in the hands of rival actors or geopolitical adversaries. The author says this created a paradoxical atmosphere. OpenAI saw itself as both responsible for the escalating dangers of AI and uniquely equipped to guide humanity toward safety. Which brings us to section 4. This is the final section. It is called Collapse, Confrontation, and the Blueprint for Power, and it covers chapters 15 through 18. It traces the period when the tensions inside OpenAI finally erupted into open conflict. The author says this is the moment when years of philosophical disagreement, structural fragility, and personal mistrust converged into a full institutional crisis. These chapters form the narrative arc that leads directly into the prologue's dramatic firing. The section begins with the gambit, which reconstructs the slow build up to the board's fateful decision. The author outlines how concerns about risk, transparency, and the direction of leadership escalated dramatically in the weeks and months before the confrontation. According to the author, key board members began to believe that Sam Altman's drive for rapid deployment was outpacing internal safety structures. At the same time, the company's commercial growth intensified the belief, held by even some insiders, that OpenAI was drifting too far from its founding mission. The gambit, as the author frames it, was the board's attempt to forcibly reassert control over an institution they feared was slipping away. In the next chapter, Cloak and Dagger, the author says the internal dynamics took on the flavor of a political thriller. Private meetings, encrypted messages, and late-night strategy sessions unfolded as different factions prepared for an inevitable confrontation. This chapter shows how secrecy became not only a tool, but a symptom of deep mistrust. The author explains that both sides believed that they were acting to protect humanity. One faction feared a reckless acceleration of AI development, while the other feared bureaucratic paralysis and the loss of a generational opportunity. The cloak and dagger atmosphere, the author says, made compromise nearly impossible, which brings us to Reckoning, and it details the immediate aftermath of the firing that was described in the prologue. The author describes how employees reacted with shock and confusion, and how public pressure mounted, and how major partners, especially Microsoft, responded with strategic force. This chapter shows how the board quickly lost control of the narrative. The author says that what they imagined as a principled act of stewardship was interpreted internally as an illegitimate coup. Within days, the company faced mass employee revolt, reputational collapse, and the very real possibility of disintegration. The reckoning was not only for leadership, but for the organization's foundational identity. Was OpenAI a mission-driven nonprofit or a commercial powerhouse, a guardian of humanity, or a global tech firm? The section concludes with a formula for empire, of course, referring back to the title of the book, which draws together the structural lessons exposed by the crisis. The author says that OpenAI emerged from the turmoil with a new configuration of power, one more centralized, more tightly linked to external partners, and less constrained by the older nonprofit ideals. Instead of resolving philosophical tensions, the crisis clarified who held decision-making authority and what direction the institution would pursue. According to the author, this new formula blended scientific ambition, commercial necessity, political influence, and public fear into a durable model for global power. OpenAI, in this telling, did not simply survive the crisis, it reforged itself into a more coherent and a more formidable empire. In the epilogue of Empire of AI, The author steps back from the chaos of OpenAI's internal crisis and reflects on what the events mean for the future of artificial intelligence. The author says that the weeks surrounding Altman's firing revealed something essential. AI is no longer a purely technical project housed within research labs. It has become a global political force shaped by private interests, national ambitions, and ideological worldviews. According to the author, the struggle inside OpenAI demonstrated how fragile the governance of advanced AI remains. The institution, designed to benefit humanity, nearly collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. A nonprofit structure encasing a commercial engine, a mission of caution paired with the incentives of acceleration, and a leadership divided between metaphysical fears and entrepreneurial momentum. The author says these contradictions are not unique to OpenAI, but emblematic of the AI ecosystem as a whole. The epilogue also follows what happened after the crisis. OpenAI regained stability, but the author says it emerged with a different power structure and a different relationship to industry and government. Partnerships deepened, public attention intensified, and the company settled into a role that looked less like a research nonprofit and more like a geopolitical actor. The author emphasizes that the consequences of this shift will ripple outward for years, shaping regulation, competition, and public expectations around AI. Ultimately, the author argues that the story of OpenAI is not just about one company, but about the emerging architecture of the AI age. The epilogue frames OpenAI's internal conflict as a preview of the political, economic, and moral battles that will define the next era of technological development. And the author says that the world is still in the earliest stages of reckoning with these forces, and that the question of who controls AI, under what values, and for whose benefit remain unresolved. That's the book. There is a lot there. It is long. It is fascinating. Each of these chapters has something to really dig your teeth into. But I wanted to highlight what I consider the argumentative distinctions. When you write a book this big, you have to take certain positions and you have to make certain arguments. And I think that the author is certainly making some. So let me highlight some of those distinctions. I would say that the central argumentative thread of Empire of AI is that the rise of advanced artificial intelligence cannot be understood through technical explanations alone. And for most people, it can't even be understood with that. The author says that AI is shaped just as much by ideology, institutional structure, and human personality as by engineering breakthroughs. Throughout the book, several key distinctions frame this argument and give structure to the narrative. First of all, the author distinguishes between the public mission and the internal reality of OpenAI. Is a big part of the book. The company presents itself as an organization dedicated to benefiting humanity, yet the author says the incentives of commercial growth, competitive pressure, and corporate partnerships often undermine those ideals. OpenAI's nonprofit identity became increasingly symbolic as the company expanded into a global tech force. Second, the author emphasizes the divide between acceleration and caution within the company. Altman's focus on rapid deployment clashed with internal factions who were more deeply concerned about safety, alignment, and long-term risk. The author says this tension was not simply a policy disagreement, but a fundamental conflict about what AGI is and what it could become and how society should prepare for it. Third, I'd say that the book highlights the distinction between scientific culture and political reality quite well. Many researchers imagine themselves working within an open, collaborative scientific community, but the author says this aspiration collided with secrecy, corporate strategy, and geopolitical anxieties. The work of AI research in this account is never purely scientific. It is embedded within the machinery of modern power. I would also argue the author draws a sharp line between myths and material conditions. The rhetoric around intelligence, consciousness, and existential threat often obscured the labor and the energy and infrastructure that made AI systems possible. The author says one must account not only for visions of world-changing intelligence, but for the very real human and environmental costs that underpinned its creation. And finally, I would say that the author differentiates between corporate governance and democratic accountability. OpenAI held enormous influence over a technology with far-reaching consequences. It still does. Yet its decisions were made by a small and shifting group of individuals. The author argues that this concentration of authority raises profound questions about legitimacy, oversight, and who gets to define the trajectory of artificial intelligence. Taken together, these distinctions reveal a central argument. The future of AI will be shaped not simply by those who build the technology, but by those who control the narrative, who govern the institutions, and who determine the rules of engagement. The author says that understanding these forces is essential if society hopes to navigate the AI age with clarity rather than with confusion. I must say that I enjoyed Empire of AI well enough. Though I will admit that the experience was at times a bit mixed. On the one hand, I think the author is exceptionally talented. She has a remarkable ability to take complicated scientific and political ideas and translate them into clear, accessible prose. Even so, I would also say that the sheer length and technical density of this book sometimes made it difficult to follow. The author usually excels at clarity, but here the subject matter, the layers of institutional policies, the safety research, the corporate engineering, the global power dynamics, all that occasionally push beyond what even she could simplify. And so by the final chapters, I found my own attention wavering simply because the narrative was so expansive and the cast of characters was a bit too large for my interests. So despite those challenges, the book remained a worthwhile read, especially given the current moment with NVIDIA recently reaching a $5 trillion valuation and other major tech companies publicly questioning whether AI is entering a speculative bubble. This felt like the right book at the right time. I actually read it over the summer, and so actually feels all the more important, although I think anyone can see that AI is going to continue to be a major question about the future of our economy, but as well as politics and governance and all sorts of interesting things. I think that this book in particular offered an unusually detailed inside view of an industry that is reshaping the global economy faster than almost anyone can process. I must say, as a historian, I especially appreciate the author's efforts to contextualize these shifts, not just as technical progress, but as social, economic, and ideological transformations. Even when the details became overwhelming, the broader story remained compelling. We are living through a world-altering technological and cultural shift, and this book helps to frame that transformation with the seriousness that I believe that it deserves. So who is this for? Well, this book is ideal for readers who want a comprehensive, deeply reported narrative about the rise of modern artificial intelligence and the internal tensions that have shaped OpenAI. It is especially well suited for people who enjoy long-form journalism expanded into book-length investigations, the kind of nonfiction that blends storytelling, institutional history, and political analysis. If you follow technology news close, or you track AI governance debates, or you find yourself drawn to discussions about safety and alignment and the other ethics of machine learning, this book will probably feel essential to you, if not incredibly interesting. It is also a strong match for readers who want to understand AI as a socio-political phenomenon rather than just a technological one. The author pays close attention to the underlying incentives of Silicon Valley, the global economic landscape surrounding the compute and labor, and the ideological frameworks that motivate researchers and executives alike. Anyone interested in how private companies accumulate power, how they justify their vision or the future, and how these decisions reverberate across the world will certainly find this book illuminating. Academics and researchers will also benefit from the book's scope and detail. I think historians will appreciate the way that the author contextualizes AI within longer trajectories of technological and economic change. Political scientists will, of course, find value in the discussions of governance, policy formation, and institutional design. And I do think that scholars of science and technology will likely see this book as an important case study in how scientific authority is constructed and contested in real time. And for readers who want to better understand the high-stakes drama behind Sam Altman's firing, the ideological split between acceleration and safety, and the near collapse of one of the world's most influential tech organizations, this book provides one of the clearest accounts currently available. And finally, it will appeal to readers who simply enjoy detailed nonfiction about powerful institutions. Books that reveal how people and personalities and missions and mistakes shape events far larger than themselves. So who is this not for? Well, it is incredibly long. I do not think that people are going to be particularly interested in this if you don't have the patience, especially since as many of the various details that the author is putting in terms of scope, ideas, organizations, concepts, there's a lot of acronyms that you have to be familiar with. Really, so much of this comes down to that crucial moment in which Sam Altman got fired. And that is the pivotal point. And so if you don't find that interesting, or if you don't think that that is going to be a fundamentally consequential moment in the history of the development of AI, then you may not care much for this book, especially since even though it comes down to that one moment, she's going to give you a lot of background information to get us to that moment. And that moment, even though it is the apex of the story that she is telling, it is also in many ways the very beginning of the story that she's telling, because it is only telling us that we have so much more that we need to understand going forward. And if none of that appeals to you and you're not curious about any of that, then this book probably isn't going to be for you. Also, like I already said, it's long. You may not be interested in just how long it is. I did read another book recently, The Optimist, which is really just a biography of Sam Altman. So these are definitely related, and I will be doing a review on that one soon enough. But the point is that if this is not something that interests you, then this book is not going to be for you. And I'm not going to lie, it may not be. I am endlessly fascinated with technology, with the economy, and the decisions that are being made that can affect both those things. But I'll also say that 19 hours in, I was done with this book, so it may not be for you. I would say The Empire of AI is an ambitious, deeply researched account of one of the most consequential institutions of the 21st century. Even when the narrative becomes dense or technically demanding, it remains an important and often absorbing attempt to document a moment in history that is still unfolding. The author offers a rare inside look at the personalities, ideals, and structural tensions that are shaping the future of artificial intelligence. And she does so with the seriousness that I believe the subject matter deserves. For readers willing to follow her through the complexity, the book provides a rewarding sense of perspective on an industry that is transforming the world at an extraordinary speed. Of course, I'd love to know your thoughts on this book or anything else that you've read about this subject matter. Like I said, The Optimist, which was another related book that you may have heard. I'd love to know your thoughts. Please let me know what you're thinking in the comments. And while you're here, please check out more of my videos. I have a wide variety of content, from legendary biographies to high fantasy, young adult novels, and everything in between. Pulitzer Prize finalists and winners. I am actually about to start a new one for the National Book Award and all of its shortlists. And I am excited to just share anything that I read with you. So please find something that interests you. Let me know what you're thinking. And if you're enjoying this video or any of my videos, please share them. The more people that know about my channel, the more videos I can make. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. And until next time, keep those pages turning.